This is just a quick live video. I just had a thought just now, and I hear men and women talking about this topic a lot. By the way, my screen is off because I am walking, and I kind of feel like it makes kind of for a distracting video when I'm walking and the camera's kind of just going all over the place. So I decided to just cut the camera off on this live. And sometimes I will, and sometimes I won't. But again, I just had this quick thought about a topic that I hear people talking about a lot. And that topic is the topic of women and being submissive, right? And what made me think about this was, I think about this kind of stuff all the time, along with other things. But I was thinking about how much, women and men, for a matter of fact, have actually changed. And, women today, and again, y'all, please don't, I'm not trying to bash women. I'm just, these are just things that I find these things, interesting and sometimes disturbing, but I like to really think about things that, kind of impact, I think, all of us to some degree. Dating, relationships, love, romance. So a lot of men today, they're talking about how women are not submissive, they're not as feminine. And I had the thought, like, what if women are only feminine or submissive, more naturally that way, depending on the day and era or the times that we live in. So what do I mean by that? Well, like today, we live in a very convenient world. We're not living out in the wild. Things are a lot more accessible. There's grocery stores. We're not living in a jungle where, we fight for our life, potentially, if we walk outside. So you don't necessarily need as much, brute strength. We live in a more, civilized society where you can't just outside and do whatever the fuck you want to. There's some level of, guidelines and parameters where, if you do certain fucked up shit, there's consequences, opposed to, more so back in the day, I would say like Wild Wild West type of, era or, times. A lot of shit just kind of just, it was like whatever, if you walk outside and, shoot somebody in the face, it's like, oh, well, it is what it is, men were a lot less, back in the day, men were a lot less, less self-control, just a lot of stuff back in the day that was kind of almost normal. Today is, there's major consequences for it. We have, law enforcement. So, if you get out of hand, like I said, there's consequences, So the world is a lot, generally speaking, safer than what it used to be. And I feel like that plays a lot into the attitude and behaviors of women. I think when women needed men and depended on men more, I feel like they were just more naturally feminine and more naturally submissive because, they kind of needed us. They kind of needed to be under men, you know what I'm saying? For, safety, for, survival, for protection, basically all the things that we're told that we're supposed to, provide as men today. But like back then, it was like a necessary thing. It wasn't optional. Like you had to protect. You had to provide. Like if you didn't work, like she wouldn't eat. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, your child wouldn't eat. Now, you know, there's EBT, there's WIC, you know, there's food stamps, you know, there's, you know, government assisted housing. You know, like women don't depend on men the way that, you know, they used to. So, you know, along with that, you know, dependency, you know, I think there was a level of, you know, closeness and respect that women had for men. And with that came, you know, submission and a level of, you know, femininity. You know, she saw what he had to do to kind of keep things afloat. She saw, you know, if this man, for any reason, you know, can't, you know, get up and go work or, you know, go hunting or, you know, protect me from the crazy ass neighbor or whatever the fuck, I'm fucked, you know. So I think, you know, women's behaviors, I mean, I don't know for a fact that this is true, but this is just kind of like one of my theories. You know, it's like women, the fact that they depended on men in different eras or times, maybe that was why, you know, they were more submissive and more respectful and more feminine, you know, because I hear a lot of, you know, podcasts and stuff like that where people talk about how, you know, well, you know, women, they work, you know, for themselves and they have careers now and degrees and, you know, they say all the time, women don't need men. And they will tell you that in a heartbeat, you know, like we don't need men. We don't need men for nothing. And I just kind of was thinking about that. And I was like, okay, you know, that actually makes sense, you know, because there's this really, really kind of bold, you know, energy about modern women and how they don't need men. They always say, we don't need men, you know, we don't need men. And, you know, it's because, you know, they don't need men today. But yet, you know, ironically, you know, it's just kind of like, well, I don't know how to really say this without sounding sexist, but it's just the fact that the world is as convenient as it is, and we've made a very convenient, safe world. You know, they don't need us, basically. It's more of like an option now, right? And I've heard and seen podcasts and videos of men kind of comparing women and men, you know, when they get money. When a man makes lots of money, you know, typically he will use that money for his family or his wife or his girlfriend. When women get money, they'll kind of save it and use it for themselves and kind of keep it for themselves. So to me, it just kind of shows, you know, kind of how, you know, there can be an illusion of, you know, this, you know, reverence and respect when, you know, someone needs you or, you know, whether it's for survival or, you know, just, you know, lifestyle provisions or, but that's the main thing, basically. You know, there is this, you know, completely different energy or behavior that people operate in when they need you, and then need you, you know, it's a completely different story, you know. So I don't know. Again, I don't know if that is actually true. And I'm not saying this to bash women. I'm a thinker. You know, I like to, I think about, it's very interesting to me to actually dissect certain things and ideas and philosophies and just ideas. And I was just thinking about this topic. And I was like, you know what, that would actually make sense, because today in the world that we live in, everything is so accessible. You know, you can Uber, you don't even need to have a car nowadays. You can literally just call somebody else up and have them take you, wherever you need to go. Like used to be, if you didn't have a car, like, a lot of women just used to, like to have a boyfriend to have a car that had a car so that he could take them here and there and drop them off here and take them to work and pick them up. But again, nowadays with technology, you don't even need your own car. You can literally just Uber. You don't even need to have your own home. You can literally, do a Airbnb. You know what I'm saying? Everything is, extremely accessible and convenient. As long as you have a way to make money, you can literally be pretty self-sufficient. And even with, making money, you don't even have to literally go out and get a job anymore. You can literally just get on the internet and, open your legs, and a bunch of random thirsty dudes will give you money just because you're a woman and you're attractive. So just really think about that. It's like it actually makes sense. Why lots of women, I'm not saying that is right, and I don't even agree with it, but what I'm saying is, when you really think about it, when you take your emotions out of how you feel about it as a man, it actually makes sense. Like back in the day, like women, they relied on men. They needed men. Women, they really don't need men today. And so since they don't need men, since men are like an option or just like an extra, they can, be picky and choosy. And, it's like, well, if I'm going to get a man, he has to be the very best man. Otherwise, I don't really care. I don't need this. It's an accessory, basically. And, I think men need to I think what it's about really is, it's just about, like I said, I'm in this phase where I'm basically kind of just more and more seeing and understanding things for what they are, kind of just taking my ego and emotion out of a lot of these types of things and just basically seeing them for what they are, and the reality of it is, I feel like a lot of how women acted back in the day, it was, whether it was fake or whether it was real love or fake love, I don't know. But I'm leaning towards, and I feel like, I will say this. I feel like when someone is genuinely relying on somebody, they can develop what you might consider, real, genuine love. But that real, genuine love that they develop for their partner or husband or boyfriend, whatever the fuck you want to call them, may not have existed had they not been in a situation where they were depending on and relying on, that man as their only source of shelter and food and protection, like that close connection and bond might not have existed if, she had her own house and she had her own way to make, money, and she had her own transportation, and, she had her own guns, and, unfortunately, it kind of leaves me in this, state where I kind of just wonder, like, do women generally, what I'm saying, really love men for who they are? Or is it strictly about, what they're doing for that woman in the moment, and I'm going to kind of leave that open-ended. And I just feel like as men, these sometimes are really hard, discussions and things to think about, because as men, we love hard and we love deeply, And, the reality of it is, no matter how you cut it, women just simply don't love the same way that we do. You know, I don't know why, they just don't, you know, and, it took me a long time to accept that and see it for what it was. But I realize now that it's true. Women do not love the same way that men do, they may have, times where they make you feel like they do. I'm not even saying that they mean to be like this, but from what I've seen others experience and what I personally experienced myself, um, I just feel like it's not in a woman's nature to love a man, unconditionally. It's just not. Like, it's not, it's basically when she needs him, to what extent she needs him and what extent he's able to, give her or provide for her, what she needs at that given time when she needs it. But, I again, just going off of, what I have seen, that's kind of how I see things, And again, I'm not saying any of this in I hate women. And, in the past, I have kind of felt like that. But the more aware and just basically informed I become about stuff like this, actually, I have an opposite effect. I'm actually less angry and less bitter about certain things that in the past, I may have been more angry about. And I don't know if it's just the fact that I'm just seeing it for what it is. I'm understanding it. And, just realizing that women they're wired differently. I don't know what it is, but the more I just kind of see things for what they are, believe it or not, a lot of the resentment that I had for the things that some women have done to me in the past, it kind of almost is going away, which to me is kind of odd because, I kind of felt like it would make me more angry. And I'm like, it's just like, it's almost like you really can't even be angry about something that it just is like there, because for the longest time I used to think like, why did they do me that way? Why did they, why this, why that? And I'm just realizing like, it's almost like imagine, playing a video game and the people in the video game, act a certain way. And, you fight the boss, you get to a certain part of the game, and every time you get to the certain part, of the game, you have a hard time, or, the boss beats you, or, it just gives you a hard time. And it's like, why are you going to be mad at the game character for? They're just doing what they were programmed and designed to do. It's literally how the game creator coded this game to run. And it's like, can you really be mad at something that's running on a kind of operating system? It's like, yeah, they are conscious, but like they're really not conscious in a way of why they are the way they are. I mean, they're sentient, but a lot of things that, women do, like they don't even know why they do it, and there's no logic in a lot of things that they do. So, the more I kind of just, realize that and see that for what it is, it's like, it's just one of, what I'm saying? I don't know. I can't really put it into words the way I want to, but it's like, the more I kind of understand, things that really are not really understandable or explainable, it's just in the code. It's just in it's written in the fabric of, the feminine essence of women. It's just like, this shit has never made sense and it's never going to make sense. And it's actually like a lot of things in existence. You know, a lot of things about reality, they've never made sense and they're never going to make sense. And once you just kind of realize that and see that for what it is, I feel like a lot of things that used to upset you kind of start to naturally kind of melt away into just who gives a fuck type of energy, you know, whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter at that point, you know, because you realize how, you know, how futile trying to understand something that can never be understood because there's no sense in it. There's no sense in it, you know, like even like with reality, I've had certain experiences, you know, I realized like there's no making sense to this. Everybody tries to act like they understand, you know, reality at its basic core. And you may understand certain, you know, levels of it or certain, you know, I guess conceptual ideas about it, but you can never truly fully grasp reality and what it is and what it's not. Like, we don't know what this is. Oh, it's a simulation. Oh, it's an organic simulation. Oh, it's energy. Oh, it's pure consciousness. Oh, you can never step out of this thing and look at it from something else outside of what it is to say for certain what it is. You don't know if this is a simulation or not. You don't even understand. You don't even have a foundation of how to identify reality as real or not real, you know, or simulated or non-simulated from outside of experiencing the thing that you have to compare it against. You have no reference point. There's no reference point of real outside of all you know to be real in existence. I think I said that right. I don't fucking know. But you get what I'm trying to say, though. Like, how can you define reality if everything that you know to be real is in that thing that comprises everything? You can't step out of everything to say, oh, no, that's definitely not real. That was just a little CD disk or floppy drive. Everything I thought to be real was literally in a computer hard drive or a quantum computer in some alien basement or some shit like that. You have nothing to compare all that you know to be real. Like, how do you even begin to compare everything you know to be real against what's really real, what reality really is? There's no way, you know? So anyway, I'm gonna end this video here. I just thought this was a good talking point and a good conversation point. Hope y'all liked it. Until next time, y'all take it easy. Have a good one. Later.